Hello, and welcome to today's eShowcase, the 2021 Green Infrastructure Designer Survey, the results and lessons learned. I would like to thank our sponsor, Ferguson, for sponsoring today's event. Our presenters for today are Rob Woodman, National Sales Manager for Ferguson, as well as Ben Miller, Business Development Manager, Ferguson Waterworks. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the presentation over to our presenters. Rob, Ben.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to wait for, there we go, the opportunity to share. And everyone should be able to see my screen. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Both myself and Ben are thrilled to be presenting this afternoon on behalf of the great company we work for, Ferguson, and more specifically, Ferguson Waterworks. We're going to kind of introduce ourselves and then get into today's content. To start with myself, a little background on myself. I'm a professional engineer. This is a photo of myself and my wife and my 4 kids at Sebago Lake, Maine, where we enjoyed time recreating in a very clean lake, which is a good thing. I tell my kids I'm a defender of natural resources, and in the role I have at Ferguson, have a great opportunity to impact, hopefully in a positive way, the most amount, or to the greatest extent, all of the water bodies we have out there in this great country. I worked in consulting for 10 years. I've been on the product side now for the last 8 years, originally with ACF, and then ACF was actually acquired by Ferguson a little under 2 years ago. And essentially, my goal throughout my whole career has been to support engineers, landscape architects, municipalities, and more recently, city-scale green infrastructure programs with a variety of innovative technologies. I have a vlog. You can check that out on YouTube if you're bored at any point. It's called Leadbit. You can see some of our work in action. And also on my weekends, in my spare time, do some third-party inspections to take a look at these best management practices and see, how they're working, how they're faring after they've been installed for a while. So I lead a team of awesome folks, business development managers, engineers, project managers, who are all focused on supporting engineers, landscape architects, and municipalities solve complex challenges in stormwater with a variety of innovative practices.
And I'm Ben Miller, also a professional engineer. I've been with Ferguson for a little over 3 months now, so relatively new. Photos, I come from the general contracting world. I was with a construction company for 13 years working on water, wastewater, and stormwater projects. They were almost all collaborative delivery, and I'm a really big proponent of collaboration, early involvement of contractors and suppliers. The photos I selected, it's me and my family are here at the beach from this summer, our first post-COVID beach trip. So that was a wonderful time to go out and see some of our natural resources. And then on the right, kind of using Rob's phrase of being a defender of natural resources, this is one of the projects I worked on that I was pretty proud of. It's in Alexandria, Virginia. We built a raw wastewater storage tank and put a soccer field on top. So it's nice to be able to defend kind of from the inside and outside, both from a technical standpoint and then from a community standpoint, to maintain our spaces. And then the building behind there is a LEED Platinum, everything you can do environmental in there. So pretty proud. Recently joined the WEF Manufacturer Committee, so I'm excited to get involved there. And that's me. Happy to be on the Ferguson team. And as a business development manager, I'm not really focused on the sales side. I'm here to support engineers, kind of like Rob does, support municipalities, and see how we can leverage Ferguson's experts maybe before construction starts. How can we help you ahead of time plan for a better job to make sure you're building the right job? So I'm looking for, some strategic partners in that front, and would love to hear from anybody on here. If that sounds like a great thing, please reach out afterwards.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so Ben and I work for the Ferguson Waterworks arm of Ferguson Enterprises, the enterprise being over 30,000 associates countrywide. And this is just a little map showing all of our locations, branches, distribution centers, and yards and whatnot. the whole purpose of, or the background behind today's conversation as it ties into green infrastructure is, why are we doing all these things? Why is it so important to implement green infrastructure in a sustainable way with longevity? And that is to protect these resources. No matter where you are tuning in today, I'm sure there's a lake or a stream or a beach near you that you probably somewhere in your heart want to have protected for generations to come so we can continue to fish and swim and do all these things. And we're seeing this kind of grow countrywide. So no matter where you are, everyone's trying to fit more and more into these urban green streetscapes, trying to do more than just conveyance, but actually process water at the source, using nature-based practices, a sort of a patchwork of those throughout a city to get it done. And no matter really where you go, whether you're in Philly or New York City, Pittsburgh, DC, West Coast, Central, South, everyone seems to be dipping their toes in this space. And that's why, as a company, Ferguson has invested in a team to provide support and solutions to this space to help folks, again, achieve those kind of wet weather goals and water quality, reduce water quality impacts. When you get into cities, there's a lot of complexities that come with those kind of urban or those urban complexities. You're dealing with tighter spaces. You're working around existing infrastructure or proposed new or replacement infrastructure. The installation of these types of green stormwater practices can affect local business. If you're doing a green streetscape and you're working along the front of a retail strip or something like that, there's a lot of things that have to be coordinated. And it's not just about digging a hole and throwing something in the ground. It's actually making sure it's working. So monitoring it, maintaining it. Maintenance is becoming, a bigger part of the conversation. And when we think about surface green infrastructure like rain gardens and bioretention, there's this need for it not only to be functional from a stormwater standpoint, but also look good, have that aesthetic value that's going to hopefully improve the sort of community that these systems are being installed on. And one of the things I keep finding is that often there's sort of a bit of a gap where there's a lot of great research happening in a lot of academic institutions. There's the design community, and then there's maybe the maintenance community. But a lot of those things are kind of mutually exclusive. And so one of the big sort of take-home messages or learnings today will be, okay, are we taking what we learn from the maintenance space and bringing it back to impact design? And as I've met with engineers, both as a consultant and now on the product side, sat down with cities trying to solve challenges, I kept kind of coming across what I saw was some pretty common threads or trends in what I would say collaboration shortcomings. And so over the years, I've kind of noticed that, okay, we could have better interactions between an owner and designer in terms of communicating what these practices are, how they're to be installed, how they're to be maintained. Even within design teams, are the landscape architect and the civil engineer coordinating or collaborating as well as they could be to get good outcomes? I've seen sort of a reduction in the quality of bid documents. I think a lot of that's driven by, 30, 50% drawings going out to the street for pricing before all that details on there. And if those stick and we say, oh, maybe we don't have to finish them up, then we have, documents in the field that aren't maybe holding all the information we need for good outcomes. The growing lack of communication or even oversight in the field, which is such an important part. I think more and more we're seeing the engineer and the contractor in general sort of be separate from each other, and the engineer not being as engaged. That's something that I keep seeing. And then even when it comes to the maintenance piece, like who's taking that on? Is it being budgeted for? So I think traditionally we think about projects in a single direction. We think about designing it, permitting it, bidding it, construction or installation, and then maybe maintenance if someone's scheduled to do it or if there's money set aside. But the more I look at it, I think we've really got to start to look at more of like a circular process where we're actually learning what's happening in the field, the construction challenges, the maintenance challenges, and having that come back and impact design. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today in the survey.
And what's great about collaboration shortcomings is these are easy to fix, right? If you have the desire to fix them, there's easy solutions for this type of problem. Well, later we'll get into some problems that don't have some easy solutions. So, might as well fix the ones you can early on. So, for instance, on the installation side and the lack of communication side, hey, can you bring the contractor in earlier? Can they provide some input into the drawings? Or is the engineering team going to be receptive to that? Let's work together to build the right project, not just build a project. Can the supplier get involved? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But let's reach out to each other. This is an easy one. Let's talk. And in the end, everybody wants the best project possible. So we'll kind of get back to that, and you'll hear me talk about collaboration plenty more over the rest of the webinar.
Yeah, awesome, Ben. And and when there is poor collaboration, that usually shows up in the final product, right? We get these systems that maybe don't look the way we want them to look, not function the way we want them to look. And unfortunately, in the space of green infrastructure, if they don't look too crash hot to the public, that can really delay the furtherance of green infrastructure in that community. So it's really important to get that stuff done on the front end so that we can get better outcomes. So with these perceived shortcomings that I kind of touched on, and Ben sort of helped impact as well in his comments, I decided about 2 years ago to actually do a survey. I said, well, hey, are these actually true? Let me reach out to designers in the community and find out what they think about these things. So I introduced this survey. I was really created to get useful feedback from the design community. And I got a great response from designers. So it was really awesome to see great feedback, great response, and I collected all that data. And really, that becomes the core of today's presentation, to go through some of that feedback, some of those results, and kind of provide some comment and some lessons learned from that. You'll see as we go through, these questions are not perfect. The answer options are pretty simple as well. I came up with this fairly quickly and then didn't even really think about where it could possibly go, and was really thrilled again to see that response. And essentially, you'll see as we go through, not all the questions today because we don't have time, but some questions about the design process, construction, maintenance, and then the overall connectivity or lack thereof between them. And unfortunately, a lot of the results sort of confirmed what I was expecting, but I obviously was hoping wasn't true, right? So confirmed a lot of those shortcomings that I touched on in the beginning. We're going to go through those today and sort of discuss them, or at least the ones that kind of stood out to me. So we're going to go through about 20 of the 30 questions. If you're looking for more information on the others, you can reach out and I'll provide that information to you. So question 2 was really just establishing what kind of audience we have, and I'm sure you'll find this helpful. So are you a civil engineer, a landscape architect, municipal planner, or some kind of other function? You'll see here that the vast majority of folks are on the civil side, 86.2% to be exact. So very much the voice of the civil engineer here. Personally, I was hoping to get a little bit more feedback from landscape architects, because I think they play a very vital role in the overall success of GSI projects, that being green stormwater infrastructure projects. But you get a sense of the audience here just from this chart. Then we get into experience. So I was curious, okay, for the folks who are commenting, how long have you been in this space? Again, encouraging here to see that over half the folks have more than 15 years of experience, which I found great because, green infrastructure was probably pretty new 15 years ago. So for the folks who are represented on that green portion of the pie chart, these are folks that have been around for a while and have probably seen a lot of the evolution of low impact development and green infrastructure and seen some of that implementation. So I was glad to see that we're getting some good feedback from that group, as well as a smattering from other folks with different levels of experience too. Question 6 was to get into the goals. So what's the primary goal of your green stormwater infrastructure designs? Is it quantity, quality, both? Or maybe you're just trying to do some streetscape beautification and sort of some green stormwater comes along with that. Interesting here, over 80% of folks looking at both quantity and quality. And I think I found that a little bit surprising. I thought there was going to be a bit more heavy weighting on the quantity only, just because a lot of cities are specifically challenged by volume. But I think you end up using, green surface expressions have some sort of natural filtration that happens anyway, almost as a pre-treatment to those. So I guess in a sense, it's not surprising that both of those are well represented. But ultimately, we've got to be using both of those pieces to get the full benefit out of the green infrastructure that we are designing. We get into question 7, we dive a little bit deeper. So I was curious, for those water quality projects, what pollutants are you mostly designing to treat? Is it trash and debris, TSS and nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, or maybe some of these newer and emerging pollutants or specialty pollutants like heavy metals and bacteria? And good to see here, 2/3 of folks on the TSS and nutrients. I think if we'd done this survey 3 or 4 years before, probably would have been a bigger red portion of the pie chart, where TSS was still kind of the hip and trendy thing. We've seen a real push now, especially when it comes to lakes and the importance of managing phosphorus or tidally impacted watersheds where we have more of a focus on nitrogen. But I was really pumped to see this little wedge of purple on bacteria. We're hearing more and more about bacteria, whether you're in Florida, whether you're in the Carolinas, whether you're on coastal New England, or even in parts of Texas and things like this. We're seeing more and more focus on bacteria. And I wouldn't be surprised that when we do a survey again in a year or two, we're going to see that purple wedge start to open out, because I think that's coming along pretty fast. And there are some new technologies out there that are being developed specifically to manage bacteria. in stormwater. And we work with a partner called Fabco Industries who've got some great options in that space. Question 8 was just sort of a step back question for folks to say, okay, let's see, are you passionate about the connection between the design work you're doing and defending these downstream natural resources? Yes, I am, kind of, or like, nah, it's just what I do for a job. And some pretty good results here. 2/3 of folks saying, yes, I am. Obviously, passion can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially in the engineering space. But this is a space we really want to see that full blue circle, right? Because if the folks who are designing this work and pushing these things forward aren't excited about it, aren't passionate about what they're actually impacting downstream, we're not going to get our clients and our owners and our municipalities as excited that we might be working for. So I think it's really important to take a step back and say, okay, beyond just what I'm drawing on a piece of paper on a plan, how is this impacting the community that it's in, or the water bodies, or whatever it may be. So think about how you can be a champion in this space. Question 9, probably a pretty important question of the survey, was, do you believe that your designs connect with the triple bottom line co-benefits of green stormwater infrastructure? Those are typically identified as environmental, social, and financial. The options were absolutely, sometimes, never, or I guess I don't really think about this. And I don't blame those people who said that. I mean, we have a situation here where the triple bottom line co-benefits isn't understood by everybody. I did a presentation up in Western New York a couple of months back, with about 200 people in the room, and I asked folks, who's heard of these triple bottom line co-benefits? And only about 4 or 5 hands were raised. So this is something we have to think about, and we've got to keep thinking about, okay, green infrastructure, if you just dig a hole and throw it in the ground, okay, that's all and good, but how can we build up those other parts? How can we lift up the social impact, the community impact, really teach folks, provide public education, and also look towards some of the economical benefits of deploying this in your neighborhood, noting that in these 2 pictures, one is very much more of a gathering place than the other, where this maintenance worker is probably not too thrilled that that's what they were assigned to do today.
And this is something that over my decade plus in construction, I saw become more and more prevalent. Pretty much everyone that is familiar with LEED and how that has kind of taken over the building space. But there's also some other programs that are sustainable from an environmental perspective, but also cover a few other areas to getting towards the triple bottom line. One that's becoming more and more common in the civil infrastructure space is the Envision program. That is focused on the triple bottom line, which is nice and refreshing. Looking at kind of a holistic picture of what a responsible project looks like, environmental, society, and economical. Kind of out of that, what I was seeing was more acceptance to pay a higher economic cost up front to end up with a better triple bottom line value at the end of the project. So it may be a little bit more expensive, but you're getting more environmental protection at the end of the day. You're getting more societal benefits from, jobs and mobility and the other types of aspects. And this kind of also leads back to collaboration, because when you have more people in the room looking at more ways to build a better job, you're going to have a better outcome. A lot of great ideas can come from the contractor. A lot of great ideas might come from a supplier, or the communication between an owner and their O&M team with other groups might get you more closer to that triple bottom line. So I think there's a lot of progress that has been made, and we can continue to make, kind of working as a team to end up at the best outcome possible, that triple bottom line.
Yeah, good point. I think even Ferguson Enterprises on its own is certainly, I think, excited about what participating in green infrastructure offers them as a company too, because they're looking to make that impact and looking to participate and have a seat at the table to help get that done. Selfish question, as an innovative practice provider, we're just curious, what are folks' reactions to incorporating proprietary technologies into the designs? Is it always, sometimes when traditional practices aren't feasible, or never? Good result here. This tells me that folks are looking and exhausting all those traditional practices first, which is really the way you should work through things. And then when you get to that point of saying, oh, you know what, I can't fit that, or that's not going to quite work, or I could realize more developable space if I did something different, then they look at these other options. And there are tons of options out there, and that's the space that myself and my team spend our days, is helping folks work out how to put these different components into designs to get better outcomes, either from a regulatory standpoint or to ease the cost and frequency of maintenance. Do you look at new design approaches or stick to what you've used in the past? Again, we see a good result here, 37% saying always looking. I would say, again, this is one that should be all blue. I think as designers, to give the best solution to our clients, we need to be constantly saturating ourselves with information on new products. So, attend trade shows, attend webinars, reach out to manufacturers and vendors, not to sell your soul to them, but to just get all that information so that you have the best, most robust toolbox when it comes to solving your challenges. So, try something new. Getting over to the landscape architect side of things, do civil engineers and landscape architects collaborate and work together in your designs? I'm sure those on the call are kind of anticipating what this might look like, and hopefully you are surprised but not surprised. We're doing green infrastructure here, folks, right? A lot of those are plant-based systems where it's important to have the right plants in the right place for the appropriate application. Another one really needs to be blue here. When we're doing these vegetative practices, plant-based systems, we need the civil and the landscape architect to work better. There's some great firms I've worked with that have both in-house, and they really do work together, but both have to be playing at the table to have good outcomes. So we don't end up with these civil engineering masterpieces, which are perfect rectangular bioretention with one plant species in perfect rows and lines, or just eliminate plants and go with extra riprap. Good job, civil engineers. I am one. I'm mocking myself as I say that. And then we get to the landscape architecture side, where maybe some things can be a little bit too complex, right? So there's a happy medium there where maybe engineers just start to put little 1 foot radii on their bioretention as a starting point to move into more interesting shapes. And when you look at maybe 4 or 5 plant species nicely spaced, so that when maintenance crews come along, they know what a plant is and what a weed is, and don't end up deadheading the whole thing.
And kind of speaking to this question and the previous one, call the supplier, call the manufacturer, whether that's us or whoever it is. If there's some input to be had, let's get it. We want the best project possible. And things change as well. Even a product you've used a long time might have some component of it change and will require some different thought in finishing your design plans and coordinating with the landscape architect. I know. We would laugh. We work with a lot of the same engineers on our water treatment plant upgrades. We would know what spec we were getting, and it was going to be the spec that they made in 1996 and then haven't really updated, and it's 2 decades later, and we're going to have the same conversation over again because the manufacturer doesn't make it anymore. So get some input early. Be open to maybe updating your designs and things. Like, actually, I think hits on a few other questions too, but. Again, collaboration. Don't limit it to the engineering and the architect space. I think everybody has a lot to offer to kind of, again, make the best job possible.
And then taking a little step further, let's talk about plant selection. So when there is a landscape architect engaged, or maybe not, I guess, is plant selection a priority in your designs? Again, kind of scary results here, right? Sometimes if we split that in half, we get about whatever that is, 29% plus 10 on the nevers. So around 40%, it's not a priority. That's not a good thing, right? We need those plants to be, whether, we're looking for natives versus invasives, or plants that can handle certain drought periods or heavy inundation, or maybe there's some plants that are more, have more of an affinity for removing certain pollutants. We want to make sure we're selecting those and selecting them in a smart way. So again, this folds into that collaboration, making sure we're picking the right plant so we get that aesthetic and that performance. Question 14, is pre-treatment included in all of your designs? Another interesting result, one of the things I've found from working with cities like Philly and some small amounts with Pittsburgh and a little bit with New York City, is that pre-treatment is one of the most important pieces to keeping maintenance palatable, right? So the unfortunate thing about pre-treatment is it's generally not regulatorily required. So it's an option you have to make as a designer to get a better outcome long term. So it will add a little cost on the front end, but it's going to give you better value moving forward. So I've found in the work we've done with Philly, with New York City, it's really all been around pre-treatment, upstream protection of a downstream green stormwater asset. There's inlet filters and screens for subsurface systems. There's devices like this one called the Rain Guardian that Anoka Conservation District out of Minnesota make that we distribute throughout the country. But just doing smart things that can allow you to trap material and reduce the maintenance on the primary asset. And when you can reduce the maintenance on the primary asset, maintenance is less frequent. It's easier. And with both of those things, the cost is driven down. Question 16, a couple of questions here on permeable surfaces. Do you design with them? Let's see what folks say. Okay, so about 2/3 saying sometimes. There's a 17% on the never, so we might dive into that a little bit more. But curious about this, permeable surfaces have become a big part of the sort of menu of options when it comes to green stormwater, whether that's, pavers, unit pavers with aggregate infill or open joint, porous asphalt, porous concrete, gravel grass pavers. There's a lot of different products in that space. When we think about the ones who do design with it, what are folks mostly designing with? Apart from the folks who are reminding us that they just told us that they don't design with permeable surfaces in the purple, pavers are the biggest response here. So almost 50%. I think that makes sense if we think about these, on-street parking spaces or small parking lots, green alleyways, those types of things. Pavers do seem to come to the front end. And there's also a variety of other products out there. So for those who have sort of used permeables in the past and maybe a bit leery about them, there are new technologies, whether that's open joint permeable pavers, so that you can avoid the clogging of the aggregate infill between the traditional permeable pavers, or even those who are concerned about, the QA/QC with casting concrete or asphalt in place. There's products like this precast porous concrete panel now, it's called Stormcrete, that can overcome a lot of those challenges. They're actually bringing something that's been made in a controlled environment to the site to avoid those challenges. Swinging over to the folks who are maybe a little less use permeable pavers less, kind of wanted to dive into what's the primary reason. And probably no surprises here that the vast majority are looking at maintenance, and then the other options are fairly small. So maintenance, and that makes sense. I know folks are concerned about clogging, or in the winter climates, salting versus sanding, how much, what kind of equipment's needed, how often does that have to be done. And all I'll say on that, yeah, you should be concerned about maintenance, and you want to pick a product that does have lower life cycle costs, but also to let you know that there's newer technology evolving in the maintenance space. So different kind of walk behind vac units or spray and suck vac units that can actually restore these systems. And we're seeing municipalities these days, when they start putting in porous gutters or alleys, they're starting to invest in equipment so that they can actually maintain those in-house, or use a third-party local contractor who has the right equipment. But not all equipment is suitable, so you want to make sure you're finding the right vendor who has the right experience to get this done. 22. And I know Ben will have some thoughts about this one from his background. Are you involved in construction oversight for your projects? Always, most of the time, rarely, never. Again, the always 7.8%. That's a small number. And look, it doesn't always have to be the engineer of record. It might be an owner's rep. It might be a vendor partner or manufacturer who often knows probably more about the system and the install than maybe the designer themselves, just from experience. But this is a challenge, right? We put all these really expensive things in the ground and we're not overseeing them. And unfortunately, I think, the standard practice is the engineer is not involved through the whole installation, and then will be asked to come out to do a punch list visit at the end of the site project and stop, pointing out the things that went wrong. And the contractor's like, well, where were you throughout this whole project? You could have caught that and told me that. But you weren't here, right? So we've got to make sure this comes back. This was typical practice that it would happen, 20 years ago, and it seems like that's faded because everyone's so busy working on the next design project.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those where, a little time investment now saves a lot of time and arguments and headache later. And a quick trip out to the job, or whoever's closest, if they can get out there, is always going to be beneficial. Just talking with the installers, hey, just pick their brain, see what they're up to, see what's easy, what's not easy. These guys, a lot of times these guys and women have been doing this a long time. They will have some helpful opinions, and always great to get some camaraderie with the team, because you'd probably be working with them again at some point. And if there's a problem, please speak up, and speak up quickly. The best case, and really the only way to do it, is to bring it up right there in the field with the installation team on site. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to have no engineers come, not talk to them, and then a week or two later get a whole report, multi-page report of problems. Half of them maybe can't even be addressed easily at this point because it's now 2 weeks later. And then just generally, the more time you have to fix things, the better. So please speak up, and those installers will love to talk with you and have a good conversation.
Another one related to construction: are the systems you design protected during construction? Again, some positives here, but this is a really important thing. And I think oftentimes we see a lot of plans, and I did this myself as a designer. We focus on perimeter controls and slope protection and things like that. But for these actual stormwater practices, we don't actually provide as much guidance or notes. And so it's really important that we're protecting these systems during construction. For small footprint systems, whether that's covering them with fabric until the side slopes and the pavements are down. This one, they went silt fence, which I don't know if that's necessarily the right solution here, because silt fence can be fairly can really disturb things when you go to remove it, if you ever remove it. Sometimes it seems like it stays out there for forever. But something to be thinking through and providing specific guidance on, so that there's these expensive systems and biosoils and permeable pavers that you just put in don't get clogged up with construction silts and sediments.
Yeah, and it's probably no secret that contractors can get a little lax in their E&S maintenance efforts. So another reason to make a trip out to the site and maybe tap them on the shoulder and point out a few issues, and maybe, hey, there's some silt collecting here, or XYZ could be done. They might grumble about it, but in the end, it's not a big deal, and most likely they owe it and need to do it. It's in their own interest. So definitely don't be afraid to speak up on that either. The other thing that would happen, not frequently, but we would always keep an eye out for when we were putting pipe in. So if you've got any systems with under drain or RCP piping, a lot of times the guys will leave a water bottle or something in there, and then it gets covered up. So always inspecting. If you got an inspector out there, or if you can make a periodic visit just before you bury anything, stick your head down and take a look inside. You'll be surprised what you find, and better to find it before things get buried. So just a little advice.
One of the ones, before we get on to the last few questions about maintenance, that I was particularly curious about was this question. After the project's complete, as a designer, are you meeting with your team for post-project forensics to discuss what modifications need to be made for future projects? Always, sometimes, or I gave folks a bit of a get out of jail free card. Never, need to move on to the next one. No time to pause, because I do realize as a design engineer, you completing the permitting for one, you're moving on to the next. You don't have a lot of time to kind of wait and meet. But when you look at these results, again, another one that's pretty discouraging, honestly. Only 10% of the time we're always doing that. So this is something that, you're maybe not getting paid for by the client. It's maybe something that's going to take time away from the next project. But it's really important to think about what happened in the field, what questions did you get, RFIs, change orders, maybe what have you learned from maintenance and other systems that maybe you've popped by when it's raining. And do kind of a deep dive and say, okay, what do we have to change in our specs? What adjustments can we make to our details so that we can get better outcomes next time? And I think, unfortunately, the same details keep coming out almost like from like a cookie cutter standpoint on project after project after project. And we're surprised why we're getting the same results, right? So that's something that we really need to do. So if you have a position of leadership in your design team, like, take that minute. Might only be 15, 30 minutes, an hour at max, just to pause and say, okay, how can we improve things next time?
And it's probably expected of me at this point, but I'll say it. Invite the contractor, invite the supplier. I imagine the supplier would be very interested in coming, continuing that relationship and being able to be part of that discussion. The contractor, maybe not, but worth an invite. The collaboration is always good.
So the last couple of questions we'll go over really focus on maintenance. So the first one was a question to the designer, right? Are the systems you design generally maintained to the level you're hoping for? I'm sure that level is different from one person to the next, but always is barely discernible in the blue there, right? So a lot of folks saying, yeah, no, I don't think they are. And And I think that's fair. I think a lot of systems aren't. When you go out in the field, I've sort of found that there's really two distinct groups. There's ones that do maintain, like you see here, very diligently keeping up with things and doing all the measuring and testing and weighing of sediment and all these things that go into the overall data set to better manage maintenance. And then you've got ones that have sat there since they were first installed and haven't been touched. And unfortunately, folks will go out and say, oh, yeah, I don't really like green infrastructure. We went by those rain gardens. They don't look very good. Well, that's on us, right? They haven't been maintained. They haven't been looked after. And it's no doubt, like anything in life, whether it's cars, houses, relationships, everything needs maintenance if they're going to be functioning and thriving, moving forward. So that's something that really has to happen. But when we dive a little further into that, are we having those discussions? So, okay, so they're not maintained the way we want. Are we talking to our clients? Are we talking about what comes along with maintenance? Generally, folks are saying, yeah, okay, we're generally having a conversation. That makes sense. We're always submitting the O&M manuals and things like that. But are we really saying, hey, you guys need to think about not only doing it, but planning for it and budgeting for it as well? So when we get into budgeting, here's a great question. Do your clients budget for ongoing maintenance? Drum roll. Ooh, right. So about 16% saying always. So if we think about the function of these systems and the need for them to be functioning to work and to process and to clean and to store and to protect the downstream water bodies, maintenance has to happen, right? And so you can put something in the ground and maybe get away with it for 6 months to a year without any maintenance and things are working. But at that point, then maintenance needs to be happening. And if we're not budgeting for it, then how is it going to happen, right? When we think about homeowners associations or municipalities, there's specific budgets assigned for this stuff. And so we have to do our best as designers to make sure that we're communicating not just what has to happen and how frequently, but what kind of money to set aside for this so that it actually happens, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of kind of weedy pits out there that cost folks a lot of money on the front end, but really aren't doing anything for us and the water bodies below.
And the key here is an early conversation, whether it's with the engineer, with your client to get them thinking about it, or if you're on a municipality or owner side, talking to your finance group about budget. Early is the key. These things take a long time. If you need another staff position and you have to create a job position, maybe even, it's going to take time. So definitely don't wait to have these conversations.
So the last part I asked folks was a general question. It was kind of short form answer, so folks could be a little bit more free to say what they wanted to say. And the question I gave them was, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing green stormwater infrastructure projects and programs today? So there was a whole smattering of responses, and I kind of took them and put them into buckets or groups to populate what looks like a Family Feud answer board. And so I'm going to reveal sort of the answers in lowest points in terms of the comments that people said the fewest things about, all the way through to the more popular results. And you can probably, in your own minds, as you listen, guess maybe what some of the higher point value ones were here. So let's start at the bottom of the list. The first one was a geotechnical comment. So, hey, it's just tough to do green stormwater when you've got poor soils or high groundwater. And I get that. Infiltration is awesome. When you can't infiltrate, there's still other ways to do green infrastructure, but it does become more challenging for sure. And installation becomes harder too. Resiliency, and this was not that green infrastructure isn't resilient. It's actually the fact that folks don't fully understand how much beyond those first flush kind of rain events, green infrastructure can actually help in terms of reducing the impact on downstream storm drain infrastructure, pipes, lakes, these types of things. Installation, so the contractor side, that's more of a knowledge piece there, is making sure folks understand what is detailed and how to put it in the ground, and on-site coordination helps with that. Space, no surprise here, right? We're talking about these urban areas. There's just not a lot of room to fit things in with the various constraints that exist. It's now getting to some of the higher ranking answers. Knowledge gap. So that's purely just education. There's a lot of chatter about green infrastructure, but what does it actually look like to implement both on a design and an install side and then maintenance in your community? Regulations. I thought this was really interesting. I wasn't expecting this, but there's a lot of folks commenting that so many of the stormwater manuals out there are so outdated that they don't really speak to green infrastructure, or they might mention as a concept, but haven't fully articulated how you can get credit for implementing that on your site development project. So that's something that everyone on the regulation side of things needs to keep looking at ways to implement that stuff. And then the final two, probably not a big concern. If you are thinking cost and maintenance, you are on the money. So So very closely ranked. Maintenance was less about, hey, green infrastructure is really expensive to maintain. It's more that folks don't understand how to maintain it, or maintenance doesn't happen. Or when you're comparing it to maintenance of something other than green infrastructure, it's actually not too bad as a comparison. Similarly with cost, it wasn't that, oh, green infrastructure is so expensive. It was actually saying, hey, this is actually a pretty cost efficient way to manage stormwater. I think that's validated by the number of cities that are using green infrastructure along with gray infrastructure as a way to, as cost effectively as possible, manage wet weather from both a quantity and a quality standpoint.
At this point, you get a little bit back to the triple bottom line approach as far as trying to solve these. Rob and I talked, hey, what are the solutions? Can we offer solutions? And we didn't really have a lot for cost and maintenance. But you know, if you can have a triple bottom line conversation and where the overall best value can exceed the cost of the project, then there's an avenue there to get some buy-in for the project, and getting the budgeting for maintenance and maintaining your installations. And it could be even things like, hey, can we put in an educational sign as well, so that you get some community buy-in and teach some folks about what's going on. All those things can kind of help get to that triple bottom line and hopefully take care of a little bit of the cost of maintenance challenge.
Yeah, I agree. And I think educational placards are awesome. I know that's sort of an easy go-to for that social or community engagement. But hey, you need public buy-in to help these things continue moving along. So adding some of that education is going to help bring more people over in favor of these types of installations. So in terms of take-home messages, as we wrap things up, you know, just to kind of summarize things, you know, we need to be thinking about ways to better collaborate all the way through. And so that's my challenge to myself, to Ben, to anyone who's listening today in our sort of areas of influence. How can we help push that collaboration along? How can we help, you know, cause everyone to pause and come together and have those conversations, not just on the front end, but also when we think about what we've learned in the field, or what we've learned from our colleagues or associates or other cities, towns, developers. How can we modify our approach and revise our approaches to come up with better outcomes? I think pre-treatment is a very common thread. Better pre-treatment leads to easier maintenance, leads to lower life cycle costs. So keep that in mind. Considering new approaches, continue to learn and see all these new things that are hitting the street to focus on specific pollutants, different things like that. Leveraging those triple bottom line co-benefits, because when we do that, we fully leverage those three-prong attack, we're going to get so much more out of a system than just a basic stormwater BMP that's in the ground. Maintenance, right? Communicating better, budgeting for it, like we talked about. Again, as a designer, we really have to lead that conversation, because if we're not, how are our owners and developers and municipal clients going to know what it takes to maintain those systems? And then ultimately, when we think about that final question, just working together to overcome some of those biggest challenges, some of the misunderstanding and challenges related to both cost and maintenance. So hopefully some of the content today helped you kind of take a minute to pause and think about how in your area of influence you can kind of help change the colorization of those pie charts and get us more to those always kind of comments where we're making sure we're collaborating to the fullest extent and supporting a project the whole way through.
And Ferguson's here to help. And Rob and his team are full of, you know, passionate individuals and engineers, and they've got the background, and we are available for you know, engineers as well as contractors and as well as owners, customers. We're here. Please don't hesitate to call. We would love to help and get involved in your project.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And so, yeah, again, we've got a lot of solutions too. We love to come out in the field. We love to meet with folks, do windshield surveys, site visits, and kind of help brainstorm ways to address certain specific challenges. We've got a full range of products as part of our suite of solutions, and love getting out and meeting with people and getting it done. That's kind of how we kind of built this initiative, and it's sort of been on the heels of that we've had the success we've had. So on behalf of myself and Ben, thanks so much for taking a bit of your day out and spending it with us. And our contact information is on the board, and feel free to reach out to us via email or phone, and we'd love to chat with you more about the crazy world of urban green infrastructure.
Yeah, we didn't. And if there are questions, please send them in. None were chatted in, but got another minute. there's one. GSI is often not monitored for specific metrics and performance is qualitative. What are some ways to define a successful GSI? Rob?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question, and I'm glad you put that in there, Tom. Thanks for doing that. I agree. It's often not monitored. There's some of the biggest cities like Philadelphia Water Department, for example, have a very robust program in terms of not only going out maintaining, but actually collecting a lot of data as they go along, weighing sediment, measuring sediment, understanding and better understanding frequency of maintenance and things like that. But I think it depends what type of BMP you're looking at for success. I think obviously the initial hurdle is getting the project funded and installed, but picking solutions that are going to have those low life cycle costs, because often the desire for a specific municipality or client to use green infrastructure practices or low impact development techniques in future projects is going to be is probably going to hinge on what it's looked like to own it since it was placed. What does it look like? How annoying is it to maintain? How often do you have to maintain it? What kind of equipment do you need to do that? So looking for systems that you can use simple maintenance equipment, qualified landscape contractors to do the maintenance are always good things. And I think if we're budgeting for the maintenance, it also makes it a little bit more palatable to say it was successful versus feeling like there were all these unknown costs that came up after installation.
Another question, will the detailed survey results be made available to participants?
Yeah, so we can do that. We're going to be sharing the presentation as part of the documents for this presentation, or the slides for this presentation. So you'll be able to see that. And what I might make sure to do, and Ben, maybe you can remind me, is we'll add all of the other questions in there as well. So the ones that we skipped over today, you'll have that as well. And for those on the call, if you have any questions about, we're looking to do another survey now, moving forward, now that it seemed to got a lot of interest. So if you have any suggested questions that you might want to see answered or included in the next survey, feel free to shoot myself and Ben an email, and we'll make sure to note that. And if it is a question worthy of asking, we will include it in the survey.
Any suggestions on resources that are available to help with budgeting for maintenance?
Yeah, great question. I honestly think the best way to look at that is to actually reach out to maintenance providers. There's a number of good ones. Companies like Apex do a lot of maintenance and manage thousands of assets throughout the country. There's some regionally focused ones like Stormwater Compliance, who are up in the New England, New York area, and a handful of others too. Exact Stormwater would be another one, sort of in the Mid-Atlantic. I honestly think those are the best folks to reach out to, because they're used to kind of basically, creating unit pricing or lump sums for regular maintenance work. And I think that's probably the best way to go. I think as engineers, we often have a general sense of what it might cost per square foot to do a bioretention or to vacuum a permeable surface. But I would always call the professionals and say, hey, what do you think? And because depending on the system, depending on the product, they might say on permeable pavers, they might be able to use a really inexpensive vac head, or they might need some really whiz bang fancy pants thing they have to use that's 10 times as much per hour to bring out in the field. Good questions though.
All right, it looks like those were some great questions. It looks like I don't see any additional questions. And so if you all are okay, I think it's going to be time for us to wrap it up. We are at the end of our presentation, and I just want to take this moment to thank Ben and Rob. Thank you so much. This was a great presentation, and thank you to Ferguson for sponsoring today's event. This actually concludes today's eShowcase. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at webfiresguide.web.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future eShowcases.